So with stocking, we'll take the example of like when someone comes into the shop who knows nothing about fish or whatever, and just wants to kind of get an idea of like at least somewhere to start. And I think for me, I think the most important sort of question is always, I just say to them, okay, well, we'll just give you like some time, like maybe 5, 10 minutes. Just like go look around the shop. Like the way I've got it set up is like the tank sizes are more or less fine. So like the way that the tank sizes that they're in the shop is more or less going to be fine long term, with like some exceptions, which I say. But I just say like go look around in this rough area for your rough size of tank that you'll be able to fit in your house, and then find whatever one fish is like the one that's like the number one. Like I can't live without that fish. I really need it, and then let me know, and then we can build the tank off of that. Um, Kind of almost building it backwards. Like what size tank do you need to accommodate that? Plus, you know, this other second fish that you kind of like, plus a few other things that might be interesting for a little kid or, you know, stuff like that. So that's kind of the general way that I do it for people. I know it's not the same of like, okay, this is the tank size. You can choose, your three options. Choose one. I kind of go backwards because then you can make sure that someone's like absolutely definitely in love with that fish. And like if it means they have to get a bit bigger of a tank or whatever, most people are usually okay with that because they like the fish. So yeah, that's kind of the general way that I do it. So yeah, I don't know if you want to talk through how you do yours, Cam, or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, my general basic spiel is, first asking how big the tank is, pointing out a few different sizes in the shop to sort of gauge roughly where they're at with that. And the next question I tend to ask is sort of what sort of filtration you have, because I think that is relatively important as well. If you've got a really small hang-on back filter for a 200-litre tank, it's still going to limit the amount of fish that you can have. But most people are pretty realistic with that. And then from there, I ask, are you looking for bright and colourful or lots of activity or lots of personality? And then kind of base and work from around that point. Generally speaking, most people fall into 2 or 3 boxes when they're trying to stock the tank. It's either bright and colourful, lots of activity, or a bit of personality. And sort of from there, you can kind of work and gauge along those lines. I do like the idea, like you're saying, you sort of reverse engineer a tank. And sometimes people want a particular feature fish and they're absolutely adamant and set on that particular fish. So you work from what that fish requires and what other stuff can go with it. Other times people aren't so requirement or don't need a particular feature fish, and then go, well, I want to go with platies, for example. So it opens up the world of cool, bright and colourful, and then we can go maybe something at the bottom with like corridors, for example, and you're kind of filling your tank in that way. Try and work it with a bottom, middle, and a top type fish, so all regions are filled up. Tends to be a really good way of filling those spaces as well.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, it's kind of like the classic formula of like the three levels of activity, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's classic for a reason, you know, because it works and like people enjoy it and everything. So that's the main thing. Yeah, I don't know if you want to say now, Ryan, about more African cichlid side of things.
Yeah.
Kind of the problems or whatever people might run into commonly for you. So yeah.
Yeah, obviously, you guys probably work in a lot of what I call dumb fish, and in a retail sense. But I pretty much only, except for online, occasionally throw something in for community stuff. But usually it's African cichlids that I work on stockings for. So normally people will contact me if they want fish, obviously, or advice. And the first questions I'll ask is, what have you currently got? And if they say, oh, nothing, I just want a cool tank, then I go, well, jump on Google. I hate using Google for fish stuff because it's always inaccurate, but jump on Google and find some tanks that you like or some fish that you like and I'll see what's available in New Zealand and how to achieve it. The biggest problem I have is people, especially when they start out, they think 3-foot tank is a huge tank and they can stick whatever they like in it, and they also think that they can stick any cichlid together. Now they physically obviously can stick anything they want to in the same tank. It doesn't mean they're going to have a very good life or they're going to have much success with it, so a little bit like Cam, I like to try and, I guess for me there's no financial incentive or anything in it, but to try and get them the biggest tank they possibly can, because the bigger the tank, the more likely they're going to have success long term. Like it's there's a lot of stuff you can do, and I'm doing a lot of my breeding in quite small tanks, but I know what I'm doing, and the ratios are right for male to female, and I've got things really well balanced because I know how to. But if you're a beginner and you're just going to bung a whole heap of fish in together, the bigger the tank, the better, And I guess also we don't like mixing too much Mambuna and peacocks and stuff because they just shred them, There's some you can mix, but not really. And breeding is another big thing for African cichlids as well. So if people want to breed in their tank, it does really limit what they should probably mix, because a lot of them will crossbreed, So I tend to go with a couple of species Mambuna tanks, or male only have peacock tanks, just for that main reason. You get a lot of colour, get a lot of activity, and they can't crossbreed.
How do you kind of feel about like mixed Mbuna tanks, for example, and having one of this, 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 one of this? Do you think that works well, or do you think a dynamic of one or two species in a tank only works better, or is it fish dependent?
I think if you can get enough of anything in a tank, it'll work. So Mambuna, you could probably do an all-male Mambuna tank if you could get, say, 30 different males in a tank, because numbers is key. It's, there's lots and lots of targets for any aggressive fish to chase around. So yeah, I would like to do an all-male Mambuna tank. Unfortunately, a lot of our species are quite limited here, so you'd have to have double ups to try and achieve that, and finding quality ones is hard, which we're working on. But yeah, I think it would work, and I think that numbers is always key, and that's where tank size and filtration become important.
Yeah.
For when you say about you mentioned briefly like mixing the peacocks and the Mbuna. I was wondering if maybe you could expand on that, because I think that's quite a common problem that I run into, at least with customers coming in. Because like what often happens is people, see African cichlids and then they throw them all in together and run into trouble. Like it might be fine at the start, but then a couple months down the line start running into trouble. And yes, I was just wondering if you could maybe expand on that, on like what are some good ones to avoid, and like if you're going to try it, some species that might be more suitable to that sort of thing. So yeah.
I guess your classic yellow and white labs can be pretty good in that sort of environment. The problem with labs is most people don't realize, but they can get to sort of 15, 17 centimeters, and they can get a little bit aggressive when they get to that size, but they do tend to be a lot less aggressive. If you keep big aggressive Mambuna with peacocks, basically they just wear them down. So initially it'll be okay when the Mambuna are small and everything's going well, but then eventually, especially when a lot of them get to the metroclima and stuff like that, like ice blues and stuff like that, get to about 15, 17 centimeters, they take over half a 5-foot tank, and they just make everyone's life hell. And that's when you're just getting all your peacocks with their fins chewed off and not getting their full color and kind of hiding up the top of the tank and not really getting much food. And, and then it just becomes a shitty existence for them, and they just kind of fade away and die. So
I haven't seen
What's
ice
that?
blues around for a while. Are they still about ice blues?
Yeah, that's still available. Yeah.
Pretty fish, but aggressive little
Oh,
buggers.
really awesome fish. Awesome fish. Same with Aurora. I wish Aurora was still around, but again,
they
they're
are
quite aggressive.
phenomenal. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Aurora.
I should have grabbed some when I could have, but they'll come back again. But yeah, African Cichlid's always difficult for me because people often don't know what they've got, and a lot of breeders sell just all sorts of random stuff, and then you end up with these really weird fish that are doing all sorts of weird stuff, and people don't know. The key question is, what have you already got? I don't want to sell you all these fish that are just going to get killed, and you're not going to have any fun with them. There's no point in you driving all the way out to Helensville and seeing me and having all your fish die. Like, it's pointless.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's just try and make it work.
What would be your thoughts on the other problem I see is like people mixing, say you're peacocks or whatever, and then chucking like the compressed seps or like Calvis or like the kind of more, I guess, delicate Tangyikans in there.
I actually have great success mixing my altos with my Malawis. I've always kept them together, and they've always spawned and done really well. So I find they go well together. The exception to that is if your tank's too busy. You've just got to make sure the altos can get some food. But yeah, I've always bred my altos in Malawi tanks.
Oh, nice.
And keep them,
and
they go really well.
It's weird. I always find that with customers, and once when I tried it myself, they just always pop their jaws out. You know how they get that like unicorn thing, just from fighting with stuff. But
they do that.
by
They
unicorn
do that
thing,
species anyway.
yeah,
It's just normal for them.
For the listeners, by unicorn thing, I mean they get like they can dislocate their jaw, and then the way it goes is like this little part pokes out their front that looks like it does look like a little unicorn horn. So yeah,
their mouths,
obviously that's not ideal.
Their mouths have evolved to suck fry out of little crevices and stuff like that, so they can extend. And then if something goes wrong with them, like fighting or whatever, for some reason that jaw extends and stays extended. And
not ideal.
They look a bit
situation.
funny. They look a bit funny, but they can still live a full life. You can actually do surgery. I've taken them out of the tank and chopped it and pushed it back in place, but it tends to keep coming back.
Yeah, I was reading that like if. Oh, no,
what are your thoughts on? I don't want to use the word biotoping, but kind of keeping all of your species specifically to regions of the world. Like, I know you said then you keep Tanganyikans with Malawis quite comfortably. I kind of like to go the opposite way, like talk Tanganyikans, Malawis with Malawis, Congos with Congo. They're all, try and base everything specifically where they're from, because you tend to be able to line up water parameters and feeding requirements slightly better. Sometimes you think it's just a bit of hit and miss. There's obviously some that have plenty of crossover. But what are your thoughts on that sort of scenario?
Yeah, definitely. I think when you start off, you mix everything together, and you never really get the best out of it. Even I think the other day I sent Cam through a video of my Strigatus, and he goes, "Wow, those are amazing." But they're in a species only tank with females, and they're just glowing, but if you put them in a mixed tank, or say with any fish, some fish you're never going to get the best out of them, they're always going to do better in the ideal environment for them. So tangs are probably always going to do better in a tank with the right pH and KH and GH and all that sort of stuff, but they can still have a happy, healthy life mixed. Some of them, I don't recommend mixing Frontosa Usually, I don't recommend mixing Tropheus with stuff. You know, it can be done and with some success. I've found. I've got some Bithynia male Tropheus in my display tank that go all right, but you've got to watch food and things like that. You really got to monitor it.
Yeah, I think for me, I think probably like you said, how there's a lot of crossover. Mix as much as you want. Like, with the, what's a good example? Like you mixing like Asian stuff and like South American stuff, where there's that crossover, go to town. I don't have any problem with that really. Like, I find it's very with that kind of stuff, it's a lot easier. I
Agree.
personally, I don't like mixing like Malawis and Tanganyikans just because I don't think the tanks always just seem like an afterthought in that kind of tank, and they never do what their natural behaviors are and all that kind of thing. So I probably don't do that side of things, but yeah, like we're relatively possible, like chuck a Cabrensis with like a bunch of tetras or whatever, and you'll still get them both looking cool and like doing their natural stuff and all that. So yeah, but I do think that the more or less water parameters is important. Like I'm not like huge on like it has to be exactly right, but like pH acidic or basic kind of thing. I would always want to be close enough in that kind of space, just because I think you get much better out of the fish long term, in terms of like coloration, like breeding and all this kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it.
What about the likes of, say, mollies, which like harder water and possibly a little bit of salinity in it, and things like your general community stuff like tetras and corridors and stuff like that? How do you work your stuff with that? Because like for me, often it's I don't want to say a red flag, but it's definitely a cool. Hey, look, I really want mollies. Well, that's kind of going to limit you to some other stuff because of the water parameters they want are so much different. And one of the fish is not going to quite work as well or be as content.
Something like mollies, I'm always a big advocate of like high pH and quite hard water at least. Like obviously a little bit of salt is going to be ideal, but not the end of the world. But I always do recommend some form of buffer or something. So like what I do is like oftentimes when like kids or something comes in with they just want a tank of like mollies and whatever, like maybe some other things, but mostly just mollies. Just give like a little coral rock or like a little piece of coral rock or something to chuck in the filter, and I find that gives much better long-term success. Otherwise, they just kind of waste away. I find like you'll get a few months out of them, but they never really like are happy. They're kind of just like hanging on for a while and then they drop off.
It's like
and I actually
kidneys give up on the man.
Yeah. And I find that's similar with like a lot of the live bearers. I'd say like the mollies are the worst for it, but I think all the live bearers definitely I'm always an advocate of, that higher pH, harder water, a little bit of salt ideally, but don't stress about that. Kind of for that medium to long term. So yeah.
Yeah, platies are the only live bearer I can think of that don't tend to be quite as bad with that. But swordtails for sure, the guppies are really prone to it as well. It's almost like what would be considered these really simple, easy entry level fish. They actually need a little bit more work than what was being perceived over the last 30 years or so.
And
100%.
I think it's a theory of ours, I guess, that they are bred in those conditions overseas, and that's basically what they've essentially, by being in captivity, evolved to. And we see it a lot. You go into any shop and you'll probably see all the mollies and all the guppies looking pretty average. You're wondering. I'm probably going to see a photo of these fish dead on Facebook saying, my parameters are fine. Why has my fish died? you know.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's one where it's like you said, it's like it can be a lot of work, but from the retailer side of things, it doesn't have to be. Like like I said before, someone wants to set up a little guppy tank. I usually just give them like a tiny little piece of coral rock or like a handful of like oyster shell or something.
Mm.
And then, I mean, almost you don't have to explain it to them. Like, a little kid or whatever, just like chuck this in the tank. It'll make sure everything's fine. And oftentimes the kid just puts it in and doesn't think about it again. But it kind of keeps the pH and like the GH and stuff at a place where you don't have to think about it, I guess.
Mm.
Because that's like the whole thing with stocking is like it doesn't have to be super hard, but there's like some basic stuff that I think hobbyists and retailers have to kind of tick off the box for. And I think that's one of those ones where it's like it can be very easy, but I know people like other retailers are like if you buy fish from your cousin or whatever can get into problems that way. So yeah.
and I think a key thing with the live viewers too is to do what you guys try and do as much as you can, is to try and find a local that's already breeding them, because a lot of the times they seem to be different strains or different strengths or whatever, and that they don't need a lot of the same stuff that the imported stuff needs. Like they can just. I had a bucket of guppies once in my fish room that someone gave me that just bred prolifically and with no filter and just in a tap water full of plants, and they were just going hard and just change the water every week, and they were sweet as, tough as, awesome fish, So I think it can be done. It's just all about knowing the fish that you've got and what they need. Like you say about water conditions, they're not be all and end all, and like you don't have to be religious about it, but you do have to sort of be aware of it and figure out where your tank sits and what might work best for you.
Even regional water differences can make a difference to what's best to be kept in your area. Like, spoken to many people that have got a really ridiculously hard water, so it limits a lot of the soft water fish, and other people with soft water, which limits some of the hard water. Like it just is what it is, and if that's the water you dealt with, that's kind of where you've got to work within, if that makes sense.
And you can stuff with it.
Exactly.
You can stuff with it.
Oh, of course you can. Absolutely.
You can stuff with it, but
choosing those numbers
it's a lot easier to. It's a lot easier to make water harder and more alkaline than it is to make it softer, though.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
It's
exactly.
easier to add stuff than take it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts when you're working on feeding for your fish then? Like when you're trying to help someone set up a tank, is what the fish requirements for food, is that a consideration when you're working through it? It's probably not as too intense with Africans until you get more specialist. Most of them like the greenery, give or take. But what about some of the other stuff that are very specific herbivores or omnivores or carnivorous? How do you deal with that?
I think for me, it's one of those ones where it's like there's a lot of stuff where it's like general community flakes and stuff they'll take. If there's something like quite a common example is pea puffers. Like people come in and they always love them, but that's not, especially for a beginner, that's going to be a lot of hassle, and like trying to feed live and frozen all the time is not going to be the easiest thing. So I'd probably steer them away from things that aren't going to take your more general like dried and prepared foods. And then from there, like if they're very heavy on like something like, for example, if they have like tons of platies and then like some cories or whatever, I'd probably steer them more towards like the veggie flakes rather than like the community flakes. But that's more of an easy one where it's like almost they don't have to think about it as well. It's like, here, just use this food, that's fine. But yeah, I think as long as they're like easily going to take some form of prepared food. I think that's kind of the main consideration for me.
Yeah.
And then you can mix in like your frozen foods or whatever for like the treat stuff. But so like, it's more, I'd say for me, it's more ease, within reason. Like I'm not gonna put one fish that needs a completely different diet in with a bunch of other things, but more or less, I'd say. So yeah. How about you, Cam?
Yeah, I once kind of worked out what's going in or what they have. Try and base it on a similar sort of thing, more vegetarian algae eating type stuff. Head towards a vegetable or a spirulina type of flake. Slightly more insect eating. Try and head towards more of an insect style food. I think there is definitely some relatively well-rounded general pellets and flakes and stuff like that. But I think it's important that we try and give them as close to what they would be eating in the wild as we can. And that works in the same way as with the water parameters. Like we're not going to chuck a corridor, for example, into ridiculously hard water because it's not going to succeed. So we're not going to continue to feed it just an algae-based tablet because it's not going to succeed on the long run, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so it's just trying to mimic as much as possible if we're sticking with off-the-shelf products. And obviously, there's a lot of fish that are very specialist that you can't kind of wiggle around with, but there's plenty that are opportunistic, and they'll pick on algae for a little while, and then all of a sudden the small little crustacean is right beside them. They'll chew that as well, so you can work with your generic stuff, and even like a spirulina flakes and stuff like that. They've still got crustacean based food in them as well, which gives them a different variety of proteins and stuff too.
Yeah, I think with that, I think if you've got kind of like that hodgepodge kind of community tank, I think variety is really key, to make sure everyone's getting some of what they need. I'd say like for kind of like particularly for like your first tank type of thing, which is kind of what I think we're basing this, well, what at least I'm thinking of for this conversation. I think things like water parameters and like aggression and everything is probably going to be more important than food. But I think food is still definitely a consideration. And I mean, even on the other side, like people really enjoy feeding varieties. I think, especially if they're viewing their fish as a pet, it's like one day they'll do flakes, and then they'll do pellets, and then they'll do like a sinking wafer, and then they do frozen, and then freeze dried or whatever. And it's kind of a good way to like get people more excited. But the added benefit is also that all the fish are having what they need, and then assuming they're keeping the water levels under control, and they've not got anything trying to eat the other fish and all that kind of thing, it gives you a great start, at least for the tank to kind of build off of. So yeah, that's kind of what I think, at least.
How much do you think feeding the variety is a human element as opposed to what the fish need? Like, as a human, if we eat the same thing 3 times a day, 10 days in a row, we're going to bleh. But like, if we're feeding the correct food to a fish for 3 weeks in a row, I don't think they care as much. I think it's more of the fun aspect of being a human to that. Like, you know what I mean?
I think it really depends. Like, so, I mean, for example, obviously I keep a lot of like bigger Americans and stuff. I think they really need it. Otherwise, they just like stop eating, or like just like Oscars and stuff, just be a pain if you don't do it. So that's kind of different. But I think for something like if we take like a general community food, I think feeding a variety gives it's probably more the behavioral aspect to it. Like there is the nutritional kind of side of things, but like if you're feeding, like imagine there's this imaginary food where it's like all the ingredients are all the same for everything, but you got like a flake, like a kind of a granule, like a freeze dried thing, and like a frozen one, kind of getting them to like the fish like foraging for the different foods, and like them feeding for some like right off the top of the water, and like all this kind of thing. I think kind of replicates that natural behavior a lot better. Even if you take out the nutritional, like, it's all the same in this imaginary example, so they're not obviously getting anything different. But I think it's really, I think it's really good to have the kind of different feeding patterns in that, kind of to replicate, like, sometimes they'll be feeding on like mosquito larvae in the wild, and then sometimes there'll be like little micro crustaceans that they're feeding on, and then they like graze on like little bits of stuff caught in a plant and all that. More on the community side of things, and then you take like your bigger Americans or like Africans or like monster fish or that kind of thing. I think is more. There's kind of some other elements where it's like they will go off food sometimes, and like with a bit more going on upstairs, you want a bit more like mental kind of engagement from the fish in trying to work out what a different food is and all this kind of thing. But yeah, that's kind of what I think, at least. What do you reckon?
I think we need to do a whole podcast on food. But
absolutely.
My thing is, I feed I try and feed a bit of variety, just because I feel like different manufacturers hit different vitamins differently. Also, I sell a lot of fish, so I like my fish to eat flakes and pellets, and like rapashi and stuff, so that if they go into someone else's tank, they don't have to so much adjust to everything and the food at the same time. Like I've bought fish that have just been raised on pellets. You put flake in there and they just stare at them and don't eat them. And I've bought fish that are raised on flake and they won't eat pellets. They take time to acclimatize to the food. So I always just try and feed a variety of everything, so that pretty much everything that's the tank they eat, knowing that these fish are going to have to acclimatize into another tank, probably with other fish that are meaner, bigger, badder than them. So at least if they can have something to eat, they're going to have a better chance of success in living.
That's a fair cool variety for anyone that's selling fish, to get different forms of things going into the fish, so recognize all sorts of everything as food for them to consume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and fresh food's always best if you can do it as well. That has all the actually still has the vitamins and stuff in it. It hasn't all been processed out of it and baked out of it, and then artificially tried to add it back in. So if your fish will eat fresh veggies and stuff, smash them in.
And sure. An interesting conversation with Rebecca the other day regarding, actually something she might have posted and had a quick comment about, regarding feeding plecos things like fresh vegetables, and obviously that's not even close to what they do in the wild. And then the conversation was brought up whether it's actually worth doing it or not, because it's the different vitamins that are obviously coming through, but it's totally removed from what we'd normally eat, and whether it's those vitamins are consumed properly and absorbed properly. Again,
and I think
total topic one day.
I don't think we understand. Like, the three of us have delved into it, and we've gone down some rabbit holes all over the internet and stuff. And the more I learn when I learn about nutrition, is I don't really know anything about nutrition for fish, and that I don't know if there's actually many people that actually do know that much about it. There's a lot of people that talk about stuff, but and there's a lot of theories, but I think you're best to stick with a quality food. I just look through the ingredient list and make sure it's not packed full of fillers and wheat and corn and starch and all that sort of crap that's not going to give the fish anything. So you actually make sure there's something that's good, nutritious in it, and then just try and feed a variety of quality foods, and hopefully you can hit it. I mean, I had my vitamins once a week as well, just as a booster, but it's probably not needed. I've done it for years without it, but I think it's a good thing to add in case I've missed something in the feeding or whatever, just try and boost them up a bit. But
for sure.
And rapashi is good too. I love rapashi. I've had good results with that. It's a good quality food that's full of good stuff. So
yeah, for sure. All right. Well, going back to stocking, what would you guys say is like the most common kind of problem or mistake that you find people running into when they're, in the process of setting up a newer tank, be it a cichlid tank or a community tank or whatever?
The biggest problem that I see and come across is there's probably two: is tank size and just the wrong fish. Like angelfish, for example.
Compatibility wise?
Yeah, like putting an angelfish in with guppies or something in a small tank, and then they're just all going to crap. Or sticking, a whole bunch of big mumbuna in a small tank with a couple of peacocks or something, or even other mumbuna, low numbers, and they're just smashing the crap out of each other.
It's probably one of those ones where it's like the two things, like either one on their own is probably manageable, but having the two things going on at the same time, it gives you a lot lower chance of being able to sort the sort of aggression problem or like the space problem or whatever. So
yeah, and in a big tank you can get away with a lot more than you can in a small tank.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just what it is. Like you see those big massive tanks online, and they've got schools of cardinals and big massive angels, and I think the fish can school properly, they can get away properly. There's enough space for everyone, and it works a lot better than cramming 5 neons into a tiny tank with a big angel that's just going to go and corner them and smash them off one by one. And they can't school properly. They've got no space. They just
yeah, exactly.
I think underestimating adult fish behaviour, and angelfish is a prime example for that. When they're small, they're cute, they're sweet as, they're going to go with your guppies and your neons and whatnot. But as they get bigger, their natural instinct is they're predators. And they're going to, like I said, round up a small neon in a corner and just continue to suck them back. So I think underestimating adult behaviour of the fish they're buying is a contributor. Angels are pretty bad at it. Tiger barbs are another one that I find pretty bad at it. They're sold in shops really, really small. They're not as aggressive as when they get bigger. And as they get bigger, they just get really boisterous and begin to just rip at other fish because it's their natural behaviour. And people put them in a 2-foot tank, put a dozen in there, and they just begin to knock off every other fish that go in there. We'll probably put half a dozen in there, and then numbers are too small to start with.
And they get quite. I mean, they're not huge, but they get quite big for a community schooling fish too. The tiger barbs, they get quite solid, and they get quite high bodied and stuff. So, and they are fast little buggers, so they probably do need a bit of space and a bit of school to actually chase each other around and do what they need to do.
Yeah, I think for the tiger barbs, I always say like a 3-foot tank or like 150-liter tank is probably the minimum. Like I mean, probably you can do it in a smaller tank, but I wouldn't bother. Just it might work for a bit, but kind of long term, I find you always run into problems, I reckon.
Just get some cherry barbs. Get some cherry barbs,
Golden
exactly.
Barbs in there. We like our cherry barbs.
We do indeed. It kind of lets me segue into what I think is the biggest problem. Well, one of the biggest problems I find people running into, and that is not for the schooling fish not having enough. I made a YouTube video on it a while ago, but I think kind of the magic number people always think of is like 6. Like, if you want to do tetras, you get 6 tetras, like 6 cories or whatever. And it's like, yes, I think there'll be most things, not all things, but most things I think will be fine if you have a group of 6. Like, I don't know, like glow light tetras, for example, chuck 6 in, they'll be fine. But for a few reasons, like if you're trying to manage aggression with some of the more aggressive ones, like your silver tip tetras or tiger barbs or that, I think you want way more, like at least a minimum, I'd say like 12, sort of 15. Otherwise, because then exactly. And then the other reason is like just kind of in terms of like enjoying the tank or like getting the most out of the tank. If you've got 3 groups of 6 various tetras, they'll be fine. They'll kind of just plob around and do their thing, which is fine, but you could get 18 of one of those 3 species. Just choose whichever one you like the most. Like say it's got, I don't know, cardinals or whatever you like cardinals. Get 18 cardinals. It's obviously, I think the reason people don't is it's a bit more scary in terms of like paying. You can pay $30 for like 6 fish 3 times, but paying $90 for 18 fish is a lot. Obviously all at once. So I say you can do it, in a few batches. Like do it in groups of 6 every few weeks, and then just add 6 more and then 6 more is probably a bit more approachable for people. But just having a big group of the one you like the most is like kind of night and day, I think, in terms of the fish behaviors, what you'll get out of it, like color, behavior, all this kind of thing. It's not something that it's kind of one of those ones where I didn't realize until I did it. I think for me it was cherry barbs was the first one. I think I got like 25 of them of the longfin cherry barbs in that original cherry barb tank I had, and it's just like it's a completely different dynamic, and I think you'll get so much more out of the fish and out of the tank. And I don't think it's a conversation we have enough. It's like kind of the minimums of like those 6 fish. But yeah, I'm such a big advocate of get as many as possible. It's one where like people come into the shop and they're like, oh, how many of these do you reckon I should get? And if I say like, oh yeah, like 12 or 15 or whatever, it's kind of like people are like, oh really? Oh my god.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm like, yeah, that seems like a lot. Obviously do it in a few batches if you want, but I would definitely recommend doing that because it would just be so cool, basically. So yeah,
it's all relevant to tank size as well. Like 30-litre tank isn't going to take 18 cardinals, for example.
Of course, yeah.
But 4 or 5 is probably going to work okay. And a 10-foot, 2,000-litre tank putting 15 cardinals in there is also irrelevant because it's not going to work either. So it's the conversation of what size tank aquarium things are going into has to be part of that as well. But
yeah,
I totally
they
agree.
scale, of course.
One of my pet peeves is 2 of these, 2 of these, 2 of these, and they'll all school together. Or how about, again, just get a dozen of one and really watch those fish do their natural thing. And I wonder no idea where that number 6 came from. I suspect it was probably a sales ploy back in the day. Want to get a couple of these, 100%. Why don't you get a couple more? They're better as 6s, but the reality is most fish are better in bigger numbers, particularly if they're a shoaling or a schooling species.
And we see this. We see this a lot with. I saw it a lot with clown loaches when I first kept them.
Yeah,
I got I had like 2 or 3 clown loaches, and then just wheeling and dealing and picking them up off trade me. I ended up with like 12 of them. And then there was this school of clown loaches at the front of my tank. They were out and about. They weren't hiding under the rocks. They were eating. They were interacting with each other. They were zipping through stuff, and they were having a great time. But you could actually see them and enjoy them. And I was like, wow, okay. Because rather than signing a torch under a rock like those crazy pleco people, you could see them. And I've seen the same.
Clown loaches are particularly bad for that.
Synodontis and the African tanks too. You put a bunch of them in. You put 1 or 2 of them in the tank, and they just sit in the rock all day. Put a bunch in there, and they're actually out and about during the day, cruising around, hanging out. Because they get that confidence in a group and they interact with each other, chase each other around, and it's pretty cool. So
yeah, I get that as well. Why don't I see my often lodges very often, or my corridors very often? Well, how many have you got in there? Oh, 3. Well, you probably need to triple that amount to make them feel confident that they can come out together.
Yeah, I think the problem is it's just, I just really think it's a bit scary, like especially because I think clown loaches is probably the worst of both worlds in that I think they really need a big group. Like they're one I'd say you'd want 12 to 15 plus, but they're like what, a $30 fish at the cheap end. So that's like a lot of money.
And you need a big tank for 12 of them.
Yeah, exactly.
They grow slow, but 12 of them is still gonna.
They do get there.
You're starting with at least a 120 centimeter tank, if not 150 centimeter tank for 12.
But there's nothing wrong with starting with a couple weeks later, getting a couple more, and building up your group that way.
Exactly.
Like 2 or 3 fish for a week and a half, 2 weeks is not the end of the world. And next next week a few more, and then all of a sudden, within 6 weeks, 2 months, you've got a dozen of these fish. It's not a massive financial hit, but they've made their way as a nice big group together.
I think that's something I think it's a bit of a industry problem. Like, I mean, I think it's much easier, or like, I suppose better for a retailer to say, oh, buy 6 now today, because obviously you get that money now. And there's like, obviously you do all the education, there's no guarantee they come back. But I think it does make more sense. It's like, okay, buy 3 today and then come back in 2 weeks' time and buy another 3, and then just keep doing that for however many weeks until you get your final group, and you'll have much better success. And I mean, obviously there's the kind of risk that they'll go, they'll buy 3 from me and then 3 from their neighbor and then 3 from the other shop down the road. And that's kind of always the risk, I suppose, from an industry point of view. But I think it's worth the risk, like, because then, I mean, it goes back to some of my thoughts about the industry, but it's like, you might sacrifice that short-term gain, but people are having success, then, they'll be buying more fish food, more water conditioner, setting up new tanks, all this kind of stuff. So
telling their
works
friends
out.
and telling their friends that fish keeping's cool, and they're actually
exactly.
Guys will start pulling lots of chicks and stuff, and everyone will be real happy. Like,
that's why I think success is so. That's like, I think that's the stocking question amongst. Well, it's probably the thesis of everything we talk about, is like setting up people to have success is the most important thing. Because I mean, for the hobby, for the industry, just for people having fun with their lives, it's the most important part. Like, the part that's going to make the biggest difference in the hobby overall.
Also, I think adding the fish gradually is better for your cycle. Like, if you've
100%.
got a small tank and it's a new tank and you're a beginner, you don't want to go out and buy 12-ton loaches and bung them in, because they're probably not going to survive unless you're really lucky. So you do.
The only downside to gradually doing it is potential parasite or disease coming back in from one. You bought from X person, then you 3 weeks later bought from another person, Like, I know the big box chains, they're all on the same loop system, for example, and you'll go in 1 week and the fish look great. You go in the next week and they've got a new lot of fish in, and up in the top corner there's an issue. So that would be the only downside to doing that.
Also, with African cichlids, you'd have to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more strategic about introducing numbers and things like that. And sometimes you probably wouldn't want to start with 3 fish. You'd probably want to get some cycled media and start with a decent number of fish, and then you really need to add a decent number of fish to spread that aggression going forwards. So if African cichlids, it's a little bit different, but you can still
expand on why.
What's
like,
that?
If why those things are a consideration, perhaps for people who aren't familiar with African cichlids from more of a community background?
Well, African cichlids, all fish, but African cichlids especially, are put on the planet to breed. So one male's cruising around a tank. This is his tank, and he wants to breed with all the females. So he sees a male, he's going to bash it because he wants to breed with the girls. He sees a girl, he's going to try and breed with it. She's not ready to breed with it. He's going to chase her away because he wants another girl to come in and breed with her. So that's what they do. If you give one male a whole tank, he'll take the whole tank, and that will be his turf, and that's where he's going to want to breed. So you stick one male in there, and then you stick another male in there. Unless the male you're introducing is really tough, the other male's going to get killed, So how we get around that is by numbers, So this male that's got a territory, you put a whole bunch of males in there, and those males take a territory too, and then everyone's pretty happy, like, as long as they've got enough space and everyone can sort of fight for their place in the tank, they're pretty good, So if you have a tank that's established, everyone knows who is. Oh, that's Nigel. He's the boss. That's Trevor. He's the next boss. And I'm Tappy down here. I'm just gonna chill until something happens. And then you stick another fish in there. Then Nigel, Trev, and his mate all pick on it. Who's this new guy? We don't like him.
Yeah.
He's gonna try and breed with our girls. So how you get around that is you add quite a few new fish so that Nigel, Trev, and his mate have a whole bunch of fish to try and get along with, and they're going, oh mate, look at them all. Hey, we can't chase all these fish at once, And the new fish actually have a chance to settle, and Nigel, Trevor, and his mate go, whatever, we can't chase all these fish around all day, If we stick one in, we'll chase it around until it dies. But you stick half a dozen in, we don't know what to do, So that's basically how it works. You gotta put numbers in there. You got to distract things. If you can introduce at night, rearrange the tank, feed, that sort of thing, it just disrupts things a little bit and lets them actually settle in.
My only question to that is, how did Nigel No Mates become the tank boss?
That's why he's the boss. Usually the bully has no mates.
And Trevor Tuffley's become the boss. That's all I need to know there.
Yeah. Well, Nigel's got no mates. That's why he's the bossy boy,
Makes sense. I think that definitely. I don't think that's something that. It's a hard one from a retailer point of view, because it's like someone comes in, wants to buy one fish. It's like, but you have to get more at that time. But then obviously that's hard, because it's like, it definitely comes across as you're just trying to sell more fish and like upsell and everything, which is like, of course, it's like from a solely business point of view, it's like an added benefit, I suppose. But if someone just wants the one, they only like that one, they've got X amount of dollars and that's all they've got, then that's where I find a lot of people run into trouble, especially with buying, because it has to come with that education. And I have plenty of issues of people buying from like the big box stores without, just getting one fish, putting it in, then waking up the next morning and it's floating around upside down. And, if you don't know why, then it's one of those ones that kind of like just kills the enjoyment. It's like, oh, I can't add a fish without it dying. I'm kind of just stuck with what I got. Like, this sucks, basically. I think that is definitely a problem. And it is a hard one from a retailer point of view.
It's hard from a retailer point of view, and it's also hard from a fish keeper's point of view. It's, oh man, I've got to add 6 fish at a time. Like these trophies behind me, they form such a strong colony that I can't put another trophies in there. If I want to put another trophies in there, it's got to be put in there at like 3 centimeters, so that it's just a fish that sits in the rocks and hangs out, and there's no threat at all to the dominant fish. Sometimes I'll go in there and there's a fish that's been beaten up and essentially kicked out of the colony, and so I'll take it out and nurse it back to health, but I can't even put it back in, because they've got such a strong colony and strong hierarchy there that fish will just get killed. So it's all
like
about knowing.
The flip side of one of those cool things. It's like, it's really cool to watch that like colony behavior and everything, but it does come with the downsides of like, if you're not in the in group, you're going to get smashed. So you got to, as a fish keeper, be on top of that and like have somewhere to put it and like all this kind of stuff. But it is one of the reasons why I think trophies are so cool. So you kind of got to pick your poison there, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not for everyone. People come over to my fish room all the time and look at them and go, wow, those. And I go, if you don't know what that is and how to keep it, you don't want it. Come back to me in a year or two and tell me exactly what it is and how you're going to keep it, and we'll talk about getting some. But until
it's one of those ones where it's like you really have to, like, of course anyone can set up any tank, but I don't think it's one where it's like you wake up one morning, decide you got to set up a trophies tank. It's like you really have to think about it, because they do limit what else you can put in the tank, and there is that whole, other fish getting booted out the colony, like shredding everything kind of consideration, I suppose.
And I'm still struggling with my trophies. I've been keeping fish for 25 years, Africans for 15. I still struggle to really get. I still don't think I've really got there with them. So that's why I enjoy them, as they're actually a challenge. I've mastered a lot of the other fish and I'm pretty good with them, but trophies I haven't quite got there yet. So that's what I like about them. It's
just trophies and DMZ that are your kryptonite.
yeah, them is only a trouble for me. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, actually, is a good segue. I think with them as well, they're definitely another one where you need a bigger group than this one or two or like six or whatever. That's another one I've run into people having trouble with, like, oh, why is this one fish trying to slaughter everything? Like, well, because there's one of them, They're definitely more.
And you get one 9 centimeter Demasoni male, and he will do some damage. Especially if he's on his own and he's got none of his own mates to pick on. He'll just go, right, this is my tank, my house.
Yeah,
I'm gonna dispatch everyone.
It kind of goes back to that thing. I think there should be, we've got like the schooling fish, or like the fish that are fine like on their own. But I really think we should have a sort of a third category of like the colony fish, where it's like a much bigger group is needed than like the school of 6 or whatever. Things like your trophies and your dems, but then also like, things like your tiger barbs or like your silver tip tetras or stuff like that, where it's like even a school of 6 isn't going to be enough to long term stop them from killing each other and like make them happy and everything. I think it is something I kind of. It's a thing I'm trying. Like I sneakily sneak it into conversations and stuff on the Facebook groups and like in person with people. Is this kind of third category that I think would be a lot more useful to people than just the binary, like you can have one or you have to have more than 6, or like you have to have 6. I think it's a useful tool. I don't know what you think about that, but it's something I'm sneakily trying to do. So if you want to help, bring it up.
I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea. At the end of the day, like I think that the attitude needs to be with everything is how do we make people more successful in fish keeping? You guys,
exactly.
You guys are obviously in the biz, so you're trying to make money, but you can make more money by having more people keeping fish than by selling people stuff that's not going to work for them. You know what I mean?
That's something that I'm really big on, like sacrificing some of that right now money for like long-term success. Like, I mean, I know me and Cam have differences of opinion, but that's why I don't sell like the bottle bacteria thing. What are they called? The bottle bacteria things? Like, it's all about the long-term success for people, for me, and I'm sure for everyone else. But of course, there's going to be differences of opinion there. But yeah.
Yeah, and I, me as basically a hobbyist, a bit of a crazy hobbyist with lots of tanks. I just want to see people keeping fish as well, and I think that the more people keep fish, the more we're likely to get new stuff into the country. We're going to get new gear. We're going to get new fish and stuff, and people might actually start. Essentially, the industry might start operating a little bit differently if there's more demand.
It's one of those ones where it's like there's like no downside to more people keeping fish. It's why gatekeeping's so stupid. But there's no downside to keeping fish, in my opinion.
Nah. And
people think you're crazy, but those people are crazy.
That's that abundance mentality, eh? The more
yeah, exactly.
We can all have more if everyone has more, and everyone can be happy. That's kind of where it comes from.
And it's just a fun, it's just a fun thing to do. So why would you not want more people to have fun, do something cool?
Yeah, it's better than putting your money in a pokey slot somewhere, like put it in
exactly.
a fish tank, pour money into your fish tank instead.
Slightly back on where we were regarding stocking.
Yes,
I've got a slight hot take on the word community, like community tanks. And it's one that I deal with or work with quite regularly. Like, I think there's three different sorts of communities. Like, you've got your happy-go-lucky community, who's going to go play these guppies, cories, for example. Then you've got like a semi-aggressive community we can roll with the likes of tiger barbs, for example, maybe dwarf cichlids, and then you got your fully aggressive community, bigger Oscars, Severums, whatever you want, kind of thing. I think any group of fish becomes a community, but when people are trying to stock it, calling things tiger barbs, for example, community fish doesn't really work in some aspects, but calling guppies community fish also doesn't work in some aspects. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, African cichlids are a community fish, but in the right community tank, in a community of African cichlids,
Yeah.
So I think the community fish thing is a bit of a weird one, like you say. And tiger barbs could be a perfect community fish with other larger, robust schooling fish in the right size tank and da 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 da.
Yeah.
You know, and American cichlids can be a great community fish in an American cichlid community tank. You know, so yeah, I agree with that one too.
I suspect the term community fish is again is a sales point that's been just developed over the years, like they buy 6 at a time, or 6 is a minimum. But yeah, anytime trying to sort someone out or get in a tank with someone, it's building on what sort of aggression levels as well to go in their community at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's definitely, I think, kind of. I think it's more like just an oversimplification of things, just for like ease of, sales, or like even just like ease of like communication, like between hobbyists and like all this kind of thing. And I mean, like, very, like, if you were to describe them in one word, sure, community might be fine, but kind of goes a bit deeper than that. Or there's a few more things to consider overall. So yeah.
And I think one of my biggest bugbears with stocking that's just popped into my mind is people online giving advice about stocking. Like, it's great to have everyone shared advice, but people will always, like, someone will say, "Oh, can I keep this with this?" And someone will be like, "Oh yeah, I've been doing it for the last 2 months. It's fine." And I think Cam hit on it before, and then baby angelfish and stuff like that. It's like people give stocking based on very limited experience and juvenile fish. Like a lot of African cichlids you can keep with all sorts of stuff and they won't kill them because they're juveniles. But then as soon as those males reach that adolescent stage of their lives where they just think about breeding, all hell breaks loose.
Smash everything.
Like literally all hell breaks, especially Mambuna. Peacock's apps not so bad, but Mambuna, man, when and you haven't seen nothing until you've seen it, like 15 centimeter ice blue just take over a whole 5-foot tank. This is mine.
Yeah, man.
Everyone else will go to the top of the tank and I will have it all. And then people are saying, "Oh, you can keep them together with this in a small tank and da da da." And you're like, you can right now, but don't tell people to do it long term because you've never seen it. You don't know.
I think it's one of those ones where it's like it kind of goes back to an issue that I think is probably a podcast episode in itself, but I don't think people sort of keep fish for the long term, if that makes sense. Or think about the long term in setting up a tank. Like, even like it's something I don't talk about that much because I've tried and it doesn't get a good response. But I reckon it takes like a good year for a tank to start looking really legit. Like, for everything to, like, your little algae and stuff to calm down, for like the microbacteria colonies of, like, not just the denaturifying bacteria, but like all these other little ones to kind of grow in, for the fish to grow in. If you have plants, for the plants to calm down, all this kind of thing. I think after a year, like 9 months to a year, that's when your tank starts to look really good. And if you're keeping a tank for less than that, it will still be cool, but that's only a short-term thing, obviously.
It becomes mature,
and I think
it's full ecosystem.
Exactly, because it's more, especially for like the more, like, tanks with more going on in terms of, like, decorations like fish and everything. It takes time for everything to kind of settle down, and that's when you really start to get stuff going on. Like, I mean, it even goes back to like clear water, which is like a comment I get a lot in the shop. Is like, "Oh, how's your water so clear?" It's like, well, this tank's been set up for like even like 2 years, so everything's calmed down. There's not so much like random dust and stuff kicking around off the substrate and that, and it's settled down. So I think that's something people need to consider a bit more.
Finding an equilibrium.
Yeah, exactly.
The tank finds an equilibrium. With a lot of the tanks that I deal with, they're constantly changing as well. Like, a new fish will become a tank boss, all that sort of stuff. So things do evolve,
Yeah,
in community in
I find
your
even
peaceful community tank that won't really happen as much, I don't think. But you know,
with cichlids, I mean, they change so much. Like even like my setup, peacock and hat tank, nothing's really changed in that for quite a while. But I mean, every week someone's a new boss, or like someone's taken a new territory, or like someone's dug a new hole that is, the most important thing in the world. So
someone's in the sump.
that exactly, yes. Well, someone is in the sump actually, but that's a question for another day. But it
Yeah,
is it is definitely things do evolve, but evolve and mature, I think, is maybe two different kind of questions. Um, in terms of like stability of a tank overall, stocking wise, and that.
yeah, yeah.
What are your thoughts on? I know we briefly touched on it. Cichlids are cichlids, so they can all live together. But I've got a big tank. I can get big fish. It doesn't matter what they need. So, like, I'm going to look at American cichlids, for example. I've always looked at American cichlids are going to go big, wide mouths. They're there for fighting, lip locking. That's what they do. American cichlids with smaller, thinner mouths like Severums, that's not really their mode. But they're cichlids. They're from the Americas, so they all should go together. What are your thoughts on that? Equal arowanas
I
in there, big massive catfish, big aggressive cichlids, less aggressive cichlids. Like they're all. Do you know where I'm kind of going with that?
I
That
do,
kind of
yes.
tank.
I think for me, like, cause like personally, I keep Oscars and Severums together, and they literally, I don't think I've ever seen them interact. They just do their own thing. But
Yeah.
I think it's more the aggression side of things that would be the consideration. Like, it's probably an unpopular take, but I think Oscars are real placid, and so are Severums. So like they get along fine. They don't really like like I said in my tank. I don't think I've ever seen them interact with each other at all. They kind of just do their own thing. But you look at something like maybe a jag or a jaguar cichlid, for example. I wouldn't mix that with an Oscar
Or Red
because
Devil,
the aggression level, or
Red
Red
Devil.
Devil, or like Midas, or
Flowerhorn.
like Texas, or whatever, Flowerhorn. The aggression levels is more the concern there, I think, rather than like the maybe like the way they fight or anything, because the way they fight is different, but they don't fight either way. Like I find Oscars would rather just be left alone and dig a hole than fight with a Severum. Um, whereas like a Texas, for example, would rather kill anything it can possibly kill because they're crazy. So
Yeah.
I think that's definitely like Oscars is probably a bad example because I think in my opinion they're super misunderstood. But like for the other ones, like it's actually Texas is a really good example because it's something I was dealing with very recently with a customer of like, why is it fighting with my Severums and a couple other things I don't remember. And it's like, unfortunately, that's just what they do. Like, they just kill stuff. There's not
Mm.
really much you can do to stop it, except for
Well,
just keep it by itself.
unless you can afford like a 10 to 15 foot tank, and give it lots of space so that it
Yeah,
can
exactly.
hopefully carve out some turf that it thinks it's happy with and leaves everyone alone.
Yeah,
Then
exactly.
you're
I think
compass.
that's I think that's really kind of the crux of that kind of a tank for me is some of the big Americans will kill everything and some just want to be left alone to do their own thing. What do you reckon about that? I feel like there's a reason you're asking that question.
Oh, I'm just not a big fan of mixed morphing, different things like that. I try and personally keep stuff as close to geographically possible together. And then like having your South Americans and your North Americans, totally different feeding requirements and all that kind of stuff, different aggression levels. So I tend to try not to do that. I was just wondering sort of where you sat
Yeah,
with that. And like you see,
yeah,
Silver Shark and Oscar, Green Severum, a Texas, all that kind of stuff. We'll mix in this big 6 foot tank, and to me that looks fairly average. And I don't
yeah,
personally think that's the best for the fish, but if it's working at the moment and the fish are content and everything else and being well looked after, then there's a different conversation.
yeah, for sure. I think it is something that it definitely needs to be considered rather than just like, oh, American can go with American,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys have any final thoughts or comments or questions or that, but yeah, I think that's
it's
pretty
probably
much
a
it
loaded,
from me.
yeah, it's probably a loaded subject that we can probably break down into about 10 different categories and start again another day.
Yeah, well, it's
definitely.
something we
I
can
think
definitely
all of our
revisit if we
ones
need to.
all of our ones are like that, aren't they? They could definitely do a bit more or a bit less in
So
certain
far,
areas. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll note it down to revisit it one day. But yeah,
Maybe if someone's still listening, they can give us some feedback.
sounds good. I look forward to it.
Right.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll just cut this out now and just do a different ending
Outro?
because I'll re-listen to it and
But you can
figure out what
stop the
the
recording,
things
right?
I want to.
Cool.
Yeah. But yeah, I'll redo that later because